As a sound designer, my life is a symphony of noise. Every creak, every whisper, every distant hum, it's all music to my ears. I collect sounds, like other people collect stamps. My apartment is a sanctuary of carefully curated audio, a library of life's soundtrack. That's why, when I saw it, I knew I had to have it. It was a grandfather clock, tucked away in the corner of a dusty, forgotten antique shop run by a man whose eyes held stories older than the artifacts he sold. The clock wasn't just old, it felt ancient, hand-built, the wood dark and gnarled. Its face was a complex web of brass and faded gold. The seller, a collector I'd never heard of, called it the silencer. He sold it to me for a price that felt like he was paying me to take it away. I brought it home, positioning it in the main room of my apartment. Its presence was immense, almost regal. It didn't tick like a normal clock. Instead, it produced a low, rhythmic hum, a deep resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate right through my bones. It was a fascinating sound, one I'd never encountered. I spent hours recording it, analyzing its unique waveform. Completely captivated. I was so engrossed that I didn't notice the time until the first chime struck. Midnight. The first bell tone was deep, sonorous, echoing through the room with a richness that made the hairs on my arm stand up. But it was what came after that. Froze me in place. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was a void. The familiar drone of the city outside my window, the distant traffic, the hum of the air conditioner, the wind whistling past the glass, it was all gone. Wiped clean, it was as if my apartment had been ripped from reality and plunged into a vacuum. I ripped my professional-grade headphones off, thinking they'd malfunctioned, but the silence was real, pressing in on my eardrums. My heart hammered against my ribs. Panicked, I rushed to the window, peering out at the familiar city. The lights were still on, cars were still moving down below, people were walking on the sidewalks. The world was still there, but it was soundless. A silent movie playing just for me. My breath hitched in my throat, the only sound in the sterile void. And then, I heard it. It wasn't from outside. It was inside the room, right next to me. It was a scraping sound, dry, rhythmic, and utterly alien. It was like bone dragging across stone, or something sharp and brittle trying to claw its way through a dry, wooden surface. The sound wasn't coming from the clock. It was just there, in the air around the clock. An auditory hallucination, my mind playing tricks on me in the sensory deprivation. I tried to pinpoint its source, but it was everywhere and nowhere at once, a phantom noise filling the unnatural emptiness. It grew in intensity, a desperate, frantic scratching that made my skin crawl. It felt ancient, hungry, and then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The final chime of the clock echoed, and the world rushed back in. The hum of the city, the whisper of the wind, the distant sirenet, all flooded my senses at once. A wave of familiar noise that was almost painful after the void. The entire event had lasted exactly 1 minute. I stood there, trembling, sweat beading on my forehead. I tried to rationalize it. A power fluctuation, a strange atmospheric event. But the scraping, I couldn't explain the scraping. My recording equipment had captured it all. The bell, the absolute drop to 0 decibels for 60 seconds. And then, that sound. The waveform was jagged, chaotic, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was a sound that shouldn't exist. The next night, I was prepared. Or so I thought. I set up multiple microphones around the room, determined to triangulate the source of the scraping. As midnight approached, my anxiety grew. The first chime hit, and again, the world outside my room fell away into that terrifying, absolute silence. My own breathing sounded like a hurricane in my ears, and then it started. The scraping, this time, it was louder, more desperate. It wasn't just a sound. It felt like a presence, a malevolent energy clawing at the fabric of reality from within the silence. It sounded closer. It sounded hungrier. I huddled in the corner of the room, My eyes locked on the grandfather clock. It stood impassively, its pendulum swinging in that same deep hum. It wasn't just a clock, it was a cage, a sonic prison. And every night, at midnight, for 1 minute, the bars of that cage grew thin. The silence it created wasn't an absence of sound. It was a different place, a pocket dimension of nothingness, where something was trapped, and that something was trying to chew its way out. The 60 seconds felt like an eternity. When the final chime rang and sound returned, I collapsed in relief. The scraping instantly gone. I spent the next few days in a feverish haze of research. The collector I bought the clock from had vanished. His shop was empty, the number disconnected. He was a ghost. I dove into obscure folklore, forgotten texts on acoustics and occultism. One found fragmented references, whispers of sonic traps and sound eaters. One text described a device that could create a perfect silence, a gateway to a realm where sound-based entities were imprisoned. It spoke of a creature that existed in the void, a being of pure sonic malevolence that fed on the memory of noise, scraping at the walls of its prison, trying to break into a world of vibration and life. The text warned that, with each opening of the gate, the creature grew stronger, learning the shape of our world through the silence it invaded. The descriptions matched perfectly. The clock wasn't just telling time, it was counting down. I realized with dawning horror what the collector had done. He hadn't sold me a clock. He had passed on a curse. He knew the entity was getting close to breaking through, and he'd made me the new warden. The new bait. I looked at the clock, at the intricate carvings on its wooden case. They weren't just decorative. They were sigils, wards meant to strengthen the prison, but they were fading, worn down by time and the constant pressure from within. Last night, the scraping was different. It wasn't just a sound anymore. I could feel it. A physical pressure in the air, a vibration that rattled my teeth. During the minute of silence, I saw the air around the clock shimmer, distorting like a heat haze. The scraping had a physical effect now. It was a Nihil claw, a tooth that was no longer just tearing at sound, but at the very air I was breathing. It was almost through. The barrier was paper thin. When the minute ended, a long, deep scratch appeared on the wooden floor next to the clock. A mark that hadn't been there before. It had touched my world. I tried to destroy the clock. I took a sledgehammer to it, but the wood wouldn't splinter. The metal wouldn't dent. It was protected, enchanted. I couldn't move it, I couldn't stop it, and I couldn't run from it. The silence wasn't just in the room. It was centered on the clock. Wherever the clock went, the silence would follow. I was tethered to it. The old texts I found had one final, chilling warning. It spoke of the final chime, a night when the creature's power would peak, when its scraping would finally tear a permanent hole between its world and ours. That night is tonight. It's 11:58 p.m. In 2 minutes, the chimes will begin. The clock is humming louder than ever, a deep, guttural thrum that feels like a growl. I have all my recording gear running, not to study it anymore, but to bear witness, to leave some record of what's about to happen. I can almost hear the scraping already, a faint echo in the back of my mind, eager and waiting. The silence is coming, but this time, I don't think it's going to be empty, and I don't think it's going to end. The scraping sound wants out. It wants to enter a world full of sound, a world it can finally feed on. The first chime is about to strike. I hope someone finds this recording. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.